Chapter 94 Complete Victory. Although he had obtained these three items, he was not capable of immediately using any of them. However, Han Li still collected them without a trace of politeness. Han Li then stood up and brushed off the dust on his body. Using a smile that wasn't truly a smile, he looked toward Jia Tianlong and the rest of the feral wolf gang. Do you intend to break your own meridians, or would you rather have me personally send you off? Han Li's tone was very polite, but the meaning of his words did not give the feral wolf gang the slightest amount of leeway. Hearing these words, Jia Tianlong felt an extraordinary cold feeling permeating through his body and freezing his entire face. He constantly warned himself to remain calm and that there would be a method to deal with this man. However, he could not help but wipe his forehead that was covered by a layer of cold sweat. Jia Tianlong forced a bitter smile, knowing that he didn't need a mirror to know that his current complexion was, without a doubt, extremely unsightly. With great effort, he turned his head around to look at everyone from the feral wolf gang, only to find that the complexions of his men were also pale. All of them were frightened and wore expressions that foretold the imminent arrival of a great catastrophe. These people were at a loss, not knowing what to do. The slightest will to fight could not be seen in their panic-stricken eyes. Jia Tianlong was dispirited. Facing the Seven Mysteries sect, he looked at his archenemy, Wang Juchu, who was coldly gazing back with a look that could kill. For the most part, the rest of the crowd had hateful expressions and a thirst for revenge. Jia Tianlong was at a loss. As he unconsciously looked outside of the deathmatch arena, his gaze fell upon his originally loyal and devout subordinates. The previous feelings that they had had and what their expressions currently expressed had nothing in common with each other. There were some who were anxious and others who were aloof, but the majority of them had unexpectedly cheerful expressions. They were all whispering in each other's ears, evidently feeling pleasure from Jia Tianlong's misfortune. This will not do. We, ourselves, will decide whether or not we will die here. We will survive and continue to complete our hegemony. It was unknown whose expression it was that touched Jia Tianlong's nerve, but frenzy suddenly flashed through his eyes. Men, come. Iron Guards, advance and prepare your crossbows. The rest of you, wait for your orders. All of a sudden, Jia Tianlong loudly bellowed with a great amount of inner strength. Jia Tianlong was worthy of being a commander. Even though the men participating in the deathmatch were previously at their wits' end, his roar that contained inner strength roused all their spirits, making the men seem as if they had just woken from a dream. Regardless of whether they were from the feral wolf gang or just experts of a small faction, they all had a pillar of support. One after another, they wiped their fists and rubbed their palms, adopting a determination to fight to the death. Han Li slightly wrinkled his eyebrow and gave a light snort. With his hands behind his back, he slowly walked towards Jia Tianlong. It seems like I still have to waste a few more movements. Han Li thought while laughing to himself. Fire the crossbows. Seeing his opponent enter into range, Jia Tianlong licked his dry lips and gave the order without hesitation. Immediately, hundreds of green steel crossbow bolts fiercely shot toward Han Li. They formed a large mass in front of Han Li, preventing even the wind and rain from passing through. An astonishing scene occurred. When Jia Tianlong saw the Han Li across from him face the oncoming crossbow bolt, the youth did not have the slightest amount of fear. Instead, he gave Jia Tianlong a strange smile before his body began to blur. Those approaching crossbow bolts passed through Han Li's figure without the slightest obstruction and flew off into the distance. In that split second, it was as if his body was incorporeal. Soon after, underneath the full light of day, his body shook several times and disappeared without a trace. Jia Tianlong's complexion ashened. Just as he instructed his subordinates to be careful, Han Li had suddenly appeared only a few dozen steps away from them. Without waiting for Jia Tianlong to give the order, the Iron Guards disorderly shot out arrows from their crossbows once more. This time, the bolts were followed by flying knives, sleeve-sprung bolts, and a number of other hidden weapons. Combined, They were like a swarm of bees shooting towards Han Li. The attack made these people look at each other in dismay. Their opponent was no longer in their sight, having disappeared without a trace. Just as Jia Tianlong became alarmed, he suddenly heard two miserable shrieks from behind him. He was taken aback and immediately turned around. He saw two iron guards near him turn into human fireballs. He also saw that the youth who had earlier disappeared now had his palms pressed against the guards' bodies. In the instant his palm left their bodies, the two iron guards had already turned to ash. As the youth's palms parted, Jia Tianlong faintly saw a flickering red light from the center of his hand, but he didn't know what astonishing technique Han Li had used. What Jia Tianlong saw was a demonstration of magic techniques and martial arts being perfectly used simultaneously. A red light glowed from both of his hands, each glowing light was a small fireball from the fireball technique. Han Li slowly circulated magic power through his body, returning the small fireballs to their original size. Then, his figure disappeared once more and immediately reappeared at other end of the crowd. Once again, another feral wolf gang member was turned into a raging fireball. In this manner, Han Li intermittently disappeared and reappeared within the crowd. Each time he appeared, there was a victim. Regardless of where he touched the victim with his hand, that person would immediately combust and thoroughly disappear from the world. Jia Tianlong blankly looked ahead with eyes that lacked even the slightest spirit. His complexion turned ash-gray, like that of a corpse. In that short moment, more than half had died under Han Li's hand. Those remaining felt insecure, and one after another, they began to flee in every direction. However, in the face of the opponent's ghost-like body technique, these people were reduced to ash, one after another. By the time he was down to his last subordinate, Jia Tianlong's fiery spirit was already smothered. The commander of the feral wolf gang had become completely numb. He knew that the fact that he was not touched by Han Li up until now was a meaningless facade, deliberately upheld by his opponent. However, he was the only one remaining now, so he reckoned that the deadly fire would eventually descend onto his own head soon. Han Li did not let Commander Jia Tianlong wait any longer. After he got rid of the commander's last subordinate, Han Li did not hesitate and immediately flashed behind Jia Tianlong. Han Li gave Jia Tianlong preferential treatment by sending him off with a complete fireball. After the great Jia Tianlong was delivered to the next world one, Han Li clapped his hands and softly said to himself, "It seems that killing this many people is not too difficult of a matter. I told you earlier to settle it yourselves. That would have been much better. There would have been less suffering as well, but you made me settle this personally." The feeling of being on fire must have certainly been unpleasant. One delivered to the next world, in Chinese literally means return west. This is a euphemism for dying, but it implies that a person has returned to the Western paradise, a reference to Buddhism.